This video series will delve into the biblical timeline of history. We aim to uncover the significance of important historical dates, such as the creation in 11,013 BC, the flood in 4990 BC, and even the date when God would bring judgment upon the house of God, the churches, as mentioned in 1 Peter 4:17. We'll also explore the date of Judgment Day, which is also alluded to in the same verse. And you might be wondering what the biblical timeline of history is and why it's important to learn. These dates weren't placed in the Bible arbitrarily. They serve a purpose beyond mere knowledge. God always has a reason for concealing truths within the Bible. These essential dates are not explicitly stated in verses, but require meticulous exploration through comparing Scripture with Scripture, the biblical method for revealing truth, mathematical analysis, and ultimately guidance from God's Holy Spirit. So what exactly is the biblical timeline of history? It's a timeline that spans across the Bible, beginning with the first book, Genesis. This timeline then extends into subsequent books and chapters. Why should we invest time in learning about the biblical timeline of history? The answer can be found in Ecclesiastes 8:5. Whoso keepeth the commandment shall feel no evil thing, and a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. To comprehend the current time or season, understanding past biblical events is essential to understand when future events will occur that the Bible is prophesied about. In Matthew
All right, welcome back everyone to another, give me 1 second. Go. All right.
How you doing, Carl? You hear me?
Yeah, how's it going, Brian?
Good.
I can hear you. All right, welcome back, and today's episode is going to be episode 33, and we're going to continue to go and look into some time paths that are found on the timeline, and just continue to make our way through the timeline. Okay, let's see. All right, so you want to go to ebibelfellowship.org. Again, I just want to remind everyone to check out the announcements tab that's right here at the top. This is going to let you know what's playing when. And just a reminder too, we have the X open forum that's on at 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And then to access the timeline, you're just going to scroll down and press the timeline button there. And I just wanted to mention, we have somebody else that's been helping us with the eBible Fellowship website. And this person's actually, he's creating a Chinese version of the website for Chinese listeners, and he actually he started working on this timeline page, and so we'll eventually hopefully get this translated into other languages so that they can also understand the timeline. Okay, so yeah, last time we just continued to look at different time paths, and we're just getting familiar with how time paths work, because you know, once you get past a certain part of the timeline, like once you get past Aaron, you know, that's essentially what we're doing, is we're using time paths. But we're gonna touch upon this in a little bit. But you know, when we get to these other dates like 1994 and well, not there. When we get past the era of Christ, we get to like 1948, 1988, 1994, 2011, 2033. You know, these dates are eventually arrived at through time paths. So as you can see, the timeline starts out, shouldn't say it starts out simply, but you can see as we progress, it does get a little bit harder to understand. And eventually, you know, you start I mean, even when we get to the time of Christ, it's been more difficult to pinpoint that just using the Bible, you know, without using like secular data. So let's see. So one thing I wanted to do though is we kind of stopped looking at when we got to the time of Aaron. I had all these squares here that basically help you keep track of all the time, so you can add it up for yourself. So I definitely encourage anyone who's looking at the timeline, don't just trust what we put here, but check it out for yourself. I mean, we show the age of the earth in each of these different patriarchs' lifespans, right? But you should check it out for yourself and see how it's done. So we're going to do something here.
Well, that's part of being a good Berean.
Right.
And plus, you'll understand it better if you go through it yourself rather than just watching us.
Yeah, and you may find something that we missed, or maybe there's a mistake. So definitely check it out for yourself. But what we're going to do is we're just going to pull out the calculator here, and we can show you how we can quickly calculate these dates to see how we arrived at. So, when you first look at the timeline, that's probably the first question is how do you arrive at certain dates, that we've arrived at? Do you count their whole lifespan? Like Adam, he lived to be 930. Well, that means the earth is 930 years old, right? But the Bible leads us to actually count, sometimes you count in segments like this, whereas other times you're counting the whole lifespan like Canaan. So when the patriarchs overlap, you're just counting smaller segments of their life, which eventually progress you on the timeline, right? Okay, so if we start with Adam's 130, we can do the 105 plus the 905. That's the entire lifespan of Enos. And then we got Canaan is 910.
And these would give you the EA years, the Earth Age years.
Right. So this is how, if you wanted to discover the timeline on your own, you would have to first go through it like this to discover the actual years, what we're calling the EA years. This would be how old the Earth actually is, right? Whereas the BC dates are going back from 1 AD. So you'd first have to be able to calculate these years, and then you could get the BC dates, and that's how Mr. Camping did it. So if you really wanted just to kind of walk through how he did it, this is how it would have started. All right, so I got Mahaliel, he's 895. We got Jared, he's 962. And keep in mind, these generations are separated ever since getting past Adam, Seth, and Enos. So you count them as separate generations. And by the time we get to Enoch, that's going to be another 365. So you're counting his whole lifespan. Methuselah is 969. And we have, so as soon as we get past Methuselah, you'll notice that the generations overlap again. And I remember Mr. Camping talked about this, and he thinks that the reason why God did this is because, and I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but after Lamech, there's no one to take over. So Lamech had Noah, but he also had other sons, right? And so Lamech, he would have had to have a son that would take over, eventually have a son that would take over being a patriarch. So as soon as Lamech died, you'd need someone in his line to take over. But the problem with that is Lamech died 5 years before the flood. So if he did have a son like that, that son would have just died in the flood, right? So Mr. Camping pointed out that this is why he believes we see this overlap again, just like what we saw with Adam, Seth, and Enos, right? In this way, Noah could continue the patriarchal line, right? And obviously, this Noah being born was a major patriarch because this is when the world ended by a flood during this time. So we got Methuselah's 969, we got the 182. Okay, and then we got Noah's 502, right? If you add
Before
the
we go on, can we just look at 2 Peter 3:6?
Yeah.
Real quick.
You want to read that?
Sure. Whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So God almost considers it to be a different earth. So we could say that the pre-flood was like the first earth, and then the world that we're in now is the second earth in a sense. And then when this heaven and earth are destroyed and we have the new heaven and the new earth, that would be like the third earth. And of course, we know third is God's purpose. So, in a way, there was a new beginning with Noah, almost like with Adam.
Yeah, and the world doesn't necessarily mean earth too. Like if you look at the world can mean people. Right? You have the world of the ungodly that's found in Peter. And spare not the old world, right? So is it referring to the earth? But save Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness. So here you can see it's talking about people bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, right? Well, how is there just a world of the ungodly if it's, just the earth? And so here you can see that this world is made up specifically of the ungodly that were destroyed. So then you have the world of, you could say the world of the elect that were actually on the ark. And it's the same thing with for God so loved the world. It's not talking about everyone. It's talking about this specific world of the elect, right?
And
So
also in John 15:18,
yeah,
if
that's
if the world hate you, you know that it hated me before it hate you. The literal earth, the rock and the atmosphere and the oceans, they're inanimate objects. They can't hate anything. They don't have conscious existence. So when it's talking about the world, it's talking about human beings, people.
yeah, and that's confirmed with the following verse. If you were of the world would love his own. But because you're not of the world, I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. So that's a good verse, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. So 502 and 98 equals 600. The 98's here because if you go down this way, you can count when Noah was born to when Shem was born. If you take the 98, that just gives you a total of 600 from Noah's birth to the flood. But what we're going to do is we're just going to go from 502, and then we're going to start with Shem's birth. So he lived to be 600 years old from his birth to his death. And so you can just add that 600 right there. So after the 502, you add 600, and you get a total of 6,525. And you're going to see that right there, 6,525. All right. So continuing down, you'll notice their lifespans have dropped here. Now they're only living to be around 400. We got 438. We got Selah, 433. One thing I want to quickly point out is that and the verse that we're given in Genesis with Arphaxad and Selah, it says Arphaxad lived 35 years and begat Selah. Well, this is a prime example right here of why we can't take verses at face value, in light of the fact we understand the Kerasim, but because there's a New Testament passage where the Bible gives a genealogy where God works backwards from Jesus all the way to Adam. And when you get to Eber, it says Eber begat Selah. But instead of saying Selah was begotten of Arphaxad, right, God inserts a man named Canaan, this mysterious person named Canaan, and then what's next is Arphaxad. So in other words, um, you have a man inserted here somewhere. So that means that Arphaxad begat Canaan, and then that Canaan begat Selah. And so it's actually proof that we have to view these as separate generations. And it shows us that we're on the right track with that idea. You can't just assume when it says begotten, it's an immediate father son. Just wanted to point that out. I'm sure there's other examples, but okay. We got Eber, 64. Again, 7860. We'll see that right there. We got Peleg. So what's interesting about Peleg is the Bible says in his day the earth was divided. Now, what's interesting is Mr. Camping had looked at some historical data, and he noticed that the Mayans had started their calendar in the year 3000 and something BC. And this is so it would have been sometime during Peleg's life, right? And but the secular scientists looking at it didn't understand why they saw that as a significant date to start their calendar. They didn't know why. So Mr. Camping went to the Bible And you notice, oh, that takes place during the days of Peleg. And so he reasoned it was because the earth was divided in the days of Peleg. So Peleg was born between 3153 and he died 239 years later, which means that sometime within his lifespan, the earth was divided. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us when. I don't think we can find that out, which I'm not sure. But we know that it happened sometime during his day. And so I don't know if that the continent splitting had like an impact on man's lifespan, because all of a sudden you have it drop from 400 to 200. And so I'm not sure if that's a coincidence. So perhaps that division of the continents further had an effect that not just the flood had on the world. So I just wanted to point that out. So if we continue here, you see Reu. He's also living the same age as Peleg. You see 239 doubled. We have Serug, 230. Again, we're keeping track of the time here, the dates, 8568. So these are actual years. Of course, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to switch these over to BC years. So instead of, I'll just insert 11,013 because we already know that's when creation began. And so what you can do is
That should be a plus 130, not a minus 130.
yeah, plus, yeah. So here you'll see the BC date 2445. You're going to see that with Nahor. So Nahor was the last patriarch we added. Or not yet. We got to his birth. So Serug dies at the age of 230. Nahor is born. Okay. So we add the 148. We get to 2297. That's the BC date. We add Terah. But
And if
this
you want to
time,
verify where we're getting these numbers from, for each of these, he has a pull down menu that will show the exact verse.
yeah, when you click these boxes, it'll display all that. One of these days, I'll probably go through and make it more obvious. It's not fully complete, the timeline. So once we get to 148, we see 130 for Terra. We're going to add that 130. We're going to see some interesting time paths with Terra one of these days. So here we go. And keep in mind, now we're not, right now, now we see how God, after the flood, he went back to separating the generations, right? That is until we get to Terah and Abraham. So you saw that with Adam, Seth, and Enos. We saw that with Lamech, Noah, and Shem. They all three overlapped each other. And now we see with Terah and Abraham and Isaac, we see God went back to that overlapping. And he also did it with Jacob, Levi, right? And so this, again, Mr. Camping believed why God did this, because now you'll notice that we don't hear of any of these patriarchs being saved until we get to Abraham, right? And so now God would work through Abraham, and instead of working through individuals like Noah or Enoch, now God would begin to work through a whole nation, right? So Abraham starts the nation of Israel, and so God's going to go through one family to go through a whole nation. And then later we're going to see that changed after God divorced Israel. He used the churches, right? Prototype and figure of Israel. And then after the churches, he went back to using individuals, right? Like he raised up family radio, used Mr. Camping to share the truth from the Bible. So you could see how God does go back and forth with that. Okay, so after 130, we have Abraham's 100. And that's when Isaac was born at 100. And then Sarah and Ishmael aren't timeline patriarchs. And what we mean by that is we don't need them to continue on the timeline, but God does give us their information, their birth and their death years. And so we color them in this color. The same thing with Joseph and Moses. Those are the four that we have so far. So after the 100, we're going to add the 60 years. And from here, what's interesting about Jacob, actually, we'll just backtrack a little bit. Jacob's born, well, we need the 60. Oops. The 60 years when Isaac begets Jacob. So right here, we add that 60. And from here, Jacob is born. Now what we can do, met somebody in the room. From 60, Jacob's born. So what we can do is we can actually take a quick time path to the Exodus from here. And that is, we know when Jacob's born at age 130, he enters Egypt. And then you add another 430 years. When you do that, you get to 1447. That's the time of the Exodus, right? Down here. That's a quick way to go from Jacob to the Exodus. 130 plus 430. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to continue on down from Jacob when he was 70 years old. We're going to add the 70. That's when he begat Levi. So now we should be at 1937. Yeah, right here, 1937. And then we add, so now what God does is now he goes back to separating the generations. So you got Levi, Kohath, Amram, Aaron. You see? So now we're back to separating of the generations. So we added the 70. So now we're going to add the entire lifespan of Levi, 137, plus Kohath's entire lifespan of 133. Right there. Amram's entire lifespan of 137. And finally, Aaron. So Aaron, we know the Bible says he was 83 years old when he stood for Pharaoh, and Moses stood with him. Moses would have been 80 until you get to 1447. So there's two ways to get there. The first way is nice because you can at least confirm, okay, yeah, Jacob did indeed enter Egypt at 130, and we have the 430 years, right? And this way is just another way to go through it with the patriarchs, right? Those four patriarchs. So now that we're at the Exodus, what I wanted to do is I never showed, I'll copy this. I never really showed how to continue this adding process after we got through Aaron. We kind of just continue down through the line of the kings. But what I'm going to do is we're going to do that. So you'll see after you add the 83, we can actually just add the 40 years when they went from the Exodus to the Promised Land. So from 1447, just add the 40 right here. Plus 40. And then we can just add the whole 360-year period of the judges, right? Do the 360. And then finally adding, and that takes us to 1047. That's when Saul began to reign. So right after the judges period, Samuel is no longer judge after 20 years, and Saul begins to reign. And then we have the 460 years, right? And all of that takes us to 587, right? Now, the 460 years, if I open up the King's tab real fast, just to prove it's 460 years. So King Saul began to reign in 1047. And at the very end, we see 587 is when the last King Zedekiah / Mattaniah reigned, 587. So if you just subtract the difference, that was 1047, right?
Yeah.
Minus 587. Or you just add the 460, the negative. Yeah, so exactly 460 years later, you get to 587, right? And 460 does break down into significant numbers, just so you know. I don't have the
2 times 23 times 10.
thanks. Brian had it with him. Okay, so we add the 460, right? So I want to put this on a document so you can see. Text edit. So you can see it, just all of these numbers get us to 587, right? So we're already 10,000 years into Earth's history, and this was a little more than 26 numbers that we added up. So I think when we get to Aaron, That was right there. That's 26. So 27, 28, 29. So just with 29 number counts, we go from creation all the way to 587 BC. And so it just shows you that it's and the math's easy. You just add them all up. It's just making sure that you have the right numbers and they're placed, and understanding Karasim and in the line of the kings, understanding accession versus non-accession. Now, because we're at 587, let's see.
Just a quick question. Did you ever put the details of the 360 on the website for the
Yeah,
judges?
I did. Yeah. If you click it's all here when you click this oops. I think I clicked it too many times. No, it doesn't want to cooperate. There you go. Yeah, so we have this whole period, and close the 460. The breakdowns right here, you know. So in 360, we went over this before. It's just 940s. So 40 years here, it ends with 240s, King Saul and King David, and it's 9 periods of 40. So you'll recognize that when you read through the Judges, you'll see that a lot. The land had rest 40 years, the land had rest 80 years, that's 40 times 2. The land had rest 40 years. And even though you'll see smaller judges ruling like 3 years, 6 years, 7, it all adds up to 9 sets of 40, right? But I go back here. So here, so we added the 40 plus the 360 plus the 460. And now what we're going to do is we get to the Babylonian tribulation. However,
I want
that
to also just mention there's also another time jump because we know that there was 480 years from the Exodus to the laying of the foundation,
right.
which would incorporate the 40 years in the wilderness, 360 judges period, 80 for Saul, 80 for David, and then the year of his death would have been the fourth accession year of Solomon's reign because there was a co-regency between David and Solomon.
Yeah, I was going to get into the 480. I just wanted to show them because we basically took that time path from here to here, went through all the kings, and I realized they didn't add these numbers like the 40, the 360. So I kind of wanted just to show a way to add it all up, at least to the end of the kings and the tribulation period. But we're definitely going to go right back to that 480 because there's a time path that was never shown with the 480. But yeah, going back to the 460, we don't include the first 22 years of the 70-year tribulation. You'll notice, remember, we talked about this, it's broken up into 22 years and 48 years, so that equals 70. But we're not going to count the first 22 years because that's already accounted for with the 460. So all you got to do is just add the remaining 48 years and you get to 539 BC. Now, we're getting closer and closer to Christ. We know Christ was born in 7 BC and we got as far as 539. So we're only talking about 539 plus minus 7 years. I think that's like 532 years left to figure out to go this way to get to Christ. Now, let's see. So once we get past the 70-year tribulation, we're at 539. So here we go. You add that 48 years. Now, I thought it was kind of interesting. Let me put this on the document that I have. Just keep track of that. 539. Okay, now from 539, we actually learn this is the first year Cyrus takes over. So we'll go to, I think it's Daniel 5. So this is when Belshazzar was feasting. And then the very last verse, it says, Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Right? So this is his first year of taking the kingdom. This would have occurred in 539, which, by the way, we got 539 from the Bible, but if you look online, secular history actually shows that 539 was the time that Cyrus conquered Babylon. So this is actually well known because they found Babylonian tablets that prove that that's when that occurred. And it just so happens that without looking at any of that, just staying within the Bible, we also get to the date of 539. And this can be shown several times. 931 BC, historically, they've been able to prove that. Jehu began to reign in 841 BC. They've been able to prove that. They got the reign of Nebuchadnezzar correct. If you do, but not everything in recent history is correct. And I want to show one example of why it's not. But Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Oops, spelled that wrong. That's okay. It'll correct me. So they have him reigning from 605 to 562. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us when his reign ended, but we know he began to reign in 605. So again, this was gotten from the Bible, solely from the Bible, right? However, they add an extra 20 years, but I don't think God lets us know that because he's highlighting this number 23. Nebuchadnezzar, it's a type and figure of Christ. He reigns for 23 years, while Satan reigns in the churches for 23 years. And so I believe that's why we see that, why God does that. So it wasn't necessary for us to know how long he actually reigned for. Okay, going back here. So that's 539. Now,
Can we go to Jeremiah 52:12 for a second?
sure. Two. You want to
Now
read
in
it?
the 5th month, in the 10th day of the month, which was the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, which served the king of Babylon, into Jerusalem. And if we go back to the calendar, you can see that if you look at his 19th year, that's going to correspond to when the kings. You have to go down a little bit. His 19th year, his 19th non-accession year, corresponds to the last year that Zedekiah was king, 587 BC. That's how we know from the Bible what year Nebuchadnezzar began to reign.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out too, somebody had emailed you Bible asking about a what they thought was they couldn't reconcile it because Nebuchadnezzar came to seize Babylon, but they didn't realize when he came to when he first came, he wasn't ruling over Babylon yet. He didn't start to rule until 605, even though the Babylon army had already encamped. The judgment had already begun, in 609, but he didn't start reigning until 605. And so there's a discrepancy they're wondering about. I have to pull up the email. Maybe we can do it later, but that can be definitely reconciled. So, but yeah, I just wanted to show something here with the remainder of these dates, and then we're going to backtrack to the 480. But the 539 can be gotten, from going through the line of the kings, and then we have this next date of 537. If you go to Ezra, it says, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of Jehovah by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, Jehovah stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, Jehovah God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So this is his first year, which would be his first full year reigning, so 538, right? 539 was when he captured Babylon. 538 would be when he's given the proclamation, or his first year reigning. However, we don't see them start to build the temple until 537 BC. And we can show that right here. So you see it says when the 7th month, and when the 7th month was come, and the children of Israel were in the cities, the people gathered themselves together as one man to Jerusalem. So they've already been given the command to build the temple. You have things being put together. Cyrus has given them, there's money involved to help build the temple. But we see that the foundation isn't laid yet, because it says now in the second year of their coming into the house of God at Jerusalem, and the second month begins Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Josedek, and the remnant of their brethren, the priests and the Levites, and all that were come out of the captivity unto Jerusalem, and appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to set forward the work of the house of Jehovah. So here we can see this is the second year of their coming unto the house of God, right? 537. And then we see in verse 10, and when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of Jehovah, they set the priests in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites and the sons of Asaph with cymbals, to praise Jehovah after the ordinance of David, king of Israel. So the foundation is laid in that second year, because we can see, and when the builders laid the foundation of the temple. And so that's why on the timeline we have 537 right here, the foundation of Zerubbabel's temple is laid. So just 2 years after Cyrus takes over, he conquers Babylon, and then he's given the command 537. Now, we later learn in the New Testament, and this information is still being looked at, but we do have this information where Jesus is, the disciples are talking about the temple, or the Jews. And this would be Zerubbabel's temple. So that would be what we just looked at in Ezra. It's not Solomon's temple, not to be confused. And do you want to read these verses, Brian?
Sure.
19.
And his disciples remembered that it was written, with the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. Then answered the Jews and said unto him, What sign showest thou unto us, seeing that thou dost these things? Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy the temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then said the Jews, 46 years was this temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days?
So they said 40 and 6 years, and Jesus didn't correct them and say, well, that's not true. Jesus was always making correction. And so we can understand that this temple was 46 years in building. Now it's been asked, is it, when you say something's been in building for 46 years, does that mean the 46 years is counting only the time where they're actually working on the temple? Because in the book of Ezra, there was pauses, right? And you can kind of think of, like, in the real world, right? When you're trying to build something, maybe after the first year, you run into permit issues, right? And like, oh man, they're still building that building. It's been 10 years and they haven't finished it, right? Well, a lot of times you can run into snags where the building may stop. And so the question is the 46 years beginning from 537, right? And just going all the way through? Or is it only saying 46 years of actual building? And it does seem to make more sense that it's talking about the complete time that they're building, because you have you would still say, even if a building had permits and stuff, you would still say it's referring to just the whole duration from when it starts, even if there's pauses or breaks. And so and there's nothing really to indicate that it would be otherwise of that. So if you go from 537, 46 years, you land in 491. And so this is the date that seems to be most likely for when Zerubbabel's temple was completed, right? So 46 years later, and it happens to be the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. Now you'll notice that there's several Cyruses and Dariuses, and they're just titles, right? Like Pharaoh is given the title, in Egypt, and there's several pharaohs in view. So they're just titles, and so you have to figure out who is who, right? Which makes it more difficult. However, the Bible does let us know that the temple was completed in this Darius's 6th year, right? So if we go to Ezra, so it'd be Ezra 6. It says, and this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. Which means that if this is a 6th year, so if it truly started in it started in 537, if it went exactly 46 years, based off the verse in the New Testament, we'd get to 491. So, and this house was finished on the 3rd year of the month Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. Well, if that's in a 6th year, we can just backtrack 6 years and get to 497, which means that Darius began to reign in 497. Now, I wanted to point out that in one of Mr. Camping's books, he laid out all the secular evidence for the Dariuses and the Cyruses that reigned, and I didn't find any that began to reign in 497. Any of them. You had one that began to reign much earlier, much later, but nothing even close. And so, this is why with secular data, it's always better to, even though recent history has shown it to be accurate, in this case, this is the one case I found where it's just not adding up. So that's just wanted to point that out. Now, if you continue on through Ezra, if you go past 491, the Bible speaks of the 7th year of this Darius the king. And that's when Ezra is going to Babylon. Let's see. So, and he came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. So if the 6th year was 691, the 7th year would be 690. Sorry, I didn't mean to say 690. If the 6th year was 491, then the 7th year would be 490 BC. And so he goes up from Jerusalem to Babylon, and it takes him 5 months, right? For upon the 1st day of the 1st month began he to go up from Babylon. So this is the 1st day of the 1st month of what I believe to be is 490 BC. But this is I'm just showing this information. I'm not saying that this is a certain. Just sharing these verses. So that was the 5th month. Now, if you continue on through Ezra, I think we can make it as far as 489, right? 489 would be the following year after 490. If you continue on down the passages, you'll see that that's when they began to divorce their strange wives in Ezra 10. So that would have been 489 BC. Now, after that, there really isn't anything else we can go by because, after Ezra and Nehemiah, the events of Ezra and Nehemiah, it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly when that information when those dates took place. And so from this date, we're really left with about 482 years until the birth of Christ. So this is an unknown era where we have yet to fill in these dates, if we even can, which I'm sure we can. Maybe we just haven't discovered it yet. And this is why we can't just continue on the timeline going this way, because we really run into a major block here, not understanding this. And so this is why Mr. Camping, he had to, he had some speculative dates for Esther, like 391, I think, or that's when the book of Esther was completed. But he basically had to backtrack all the way into the crossing of the Jordan River in 1407. So if we backtrack from here, go all the way back to 1407, which is right here. So this is 40 years after the Exodus. Start right here. So instead of counting the 360, we can just go from the 40 years to 1407. Start here. We're going to ignore everything forward. And we're going to start here. And we're just going to go in 50-year segments because there's 28 Jubilee years, right? So we just go down the line, and that gets us to 7 BC when Christ is born. And, the Gregorians thought Christ was born in 1 AD, right? They're 7 years off. We already proved that he was born in 7 BC. And this is one of the proofs we had that he was born on a Jubilee year, and he had everything to do with the Jubilee. And it's exactly 1400 years from the Promised Land. And you can even see that number 7 right there. See that? 1407. you're going exactly 1400 years, which is 50 times 28. It's 28 Jubilees, and you'll get to 7 BC. So this is how we're able to kind of work around this area on the timeline, right? And that's how we got to the birth of Christ. And we've already begun to go through this information, but we're going to have to pick that up at a later time. We'll eventually make our way back because we're just trying to continue to fill out the information for these dates. Now, I just wanted to show you that there are different paths. Now, Brian mentioned 480.
Before we get to that, just could we look at 1 Kings 6:37? Just want to prove that all this is referring to um, Zerubbabel's temple and not Solomon's temple.
Okay. All right.
1 Kings 6:37.
Oh, 37.
Uh, in the fourth year, and this would be the fourth accession year of Solomon's reign, in the fourth year was the foundation of the house of Jehovah laid in the month Ziph. Ziph is the second month. And in the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the eighth month, was the house finished throughout all the parts thereof, and according to all the fashion of it. So he was 7 years in building it. So it took 7 years or 7.5 years, because you're going from the second month to the eighth month, to build the first temple. And whereas Zerubbabel's temple took 46 years. So that's how we know it's not referring to Solomon's temple.
Yeah. And you'll notice it's that much longer. 46 minus 7, it's 39 years longer to build the second temple. And almost 40 years longer. But yeah, we know from here, this is when the temple was laid, the foundation was laid. And so you can, now another interesting thing too is from 967, if you go exactly 430 years, you actually land on when the second temple began to be laid. You land on 537. 430 was that same number that we used, for the Exodus. I mean, from the time they were in Egypt, right? Well, that 430, the time when they left Egypt until 967 was that 480, right? But if you go another 430 years, you do get to that same date of 537. That's when Cyrus gave the command to lay the temple, right? Now I'm going to go here. So the Bible spoke of in the same chapter, 1 Kings 6:1, and it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt. Now we've already went over this several times, but if you go 1447 plus 480, you get to 967. So this 480 takes you there. Now, what's interesting is if you do a time path using the 480, so you do it 480 plus 480 plus 480, it's 3 times. I forgot to show the text here, but you actually get to the birth of Christ in 7 BC, which is right here, 7 BC, and right there, lines up perfectly. So this first 40 takes you from the Exodus to when Solomon laid down the foundation of the temple. You go 2 more 480s. I don't know if the second one lands on anything of significance. You get to around the time of actually this area. Let's see. It's 480 times 2. You get to 487. So that would have been 2 years after this event. But it's that third 480. That's what's significant. You get to 7 BC. So 7 BC is when Christ was born. Now, this is interesting because 480 times 3 equals 1440. And Mr. Camping had mentioned 2 time paths. You go from the from the Promised Land, and you get to Christ's birth. That's the 1407. That's the starting date. 1400 years later, you get to Christ's birth. Well, this is if you start from the Exodus, and instead of going, the total is 1440, right? Instead of 1400, it's 1440. It's an extra 40 years, right? But another way to look at it is just 480 times 3. So this is definitely an interesting time path there. Um, okay, and then just wanted to show a few more things. We don't have too much time left. Let's go to the judges. So we kind of stopped off with Abraham, Moses. We showed time paths for the Exodus, for the Promised Land. We just showed this one. But we haven't really gone past that to show other time paths. And so we're going to kind of work our way down. We also have other time paths from previous patriarchs, before Abraham, but we'll get into those later. Um, but one interesting one that I found had to do with Tola. Tola was, you'll recall, he's one of the judges. And by the way, Tola means worm. It's the same word for worm, like in Isaiah, where the worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. And Tola pictures, I believe Chris taught in Mr. Camping that Tola pictures Christ and the judgment on the churches. So you notice he reigned for 23 years, right? And it's missing here, but Jair reigned for 22 years. And so Chris had pointed out, and Mr. Camping did in one of his books, that you have a 23-year tribulation, but you also have a 22-year tribulation with Jair. But just focusing on Tola, Tola reigned for 23 years, right? And if you do a time path with just 23-year segments, we're going to see what dates that lands on. I have the Tola right here. Let's see. Don't have it on the timeline, but I'll show you on this document. All right, so if you go 23 years times 3, right? So 1204 is when Tola began to judge. 1204 BC, right? And you go 23 years times 3, you get to when Abdon began to judge. Now, I don't know if this is significant. It is 23 times 3, but it just lands on another judge's rule. But I think more importantly, it actually lands on 537. Now, we're just looking at 537, right? Tola judges 23 years till temple foundation. So 537 is when Zerubbabel's foundation was laid, and that's 23 times 29, right? 23 times 29, that's 667. That number is actually kind of curious because in Ezra, you had captives leaving. You had 666, and you also had 667. But we know 23 is the number for judgment, and 29 appears a lot in the Bible. We went over that. Christ was baptized in 29 AD. But what is curious is that Tola, his 23 years, lands on 537. That's the temple foundation. Now, if you go another 23 years, so let's see. Actually, you're going 2 more. So you go here, 29 times, you land on 537. You go 30, you land on 514. But if you go 31, you land on 491. And that's the date we're saying the temple was completed. And it makes sense because the temple took 46 years. Well, that's 23 times 23. That's 46 years. So it lands on the date of when the foundation was laid, and it lands on the date when the temple was completed. So it seems like this possibly gives more credence for the idea of the temple being built from 537 to 491, because it's 46 years, and this time path takes you to both of those. And 31 shows up quite a few times in different time paths, but I know, for example, Joshua slew, I think, 31 kings, Canaanitish kings. So we see that numbers there. I think there's a ruler, a king who reigned for 31 years.
Well, Josiah ruled for 31 years.
Yeah, King Josiah.
Um, Also, Adam lived for 930 years, which breaks down to 30 times 31.
Oh, okay. 31. Yeah, 930. Um, and then finally, if you go 139 times, it lands in 1994. Now, I couldn't break down 139 with Tola. So that would be the latter rain, and this would be actual years. These are actually all actual years. But I mean, you have the number 23, which is interesting. But again, because it can't break down 139, I'm not sure if it's significant. 139 is it's a prime number, but you do see the number 39 in there. But again, the main point of this was just to show Tola how his 23 years lands on 539 BC and on 491. So that's definitely maybe something worth looking into. And then later, we don't have too much time. We're actually out of time, so we'll go over different judges like J.R. and see where his time paths land. And we have just more to go through, so we'll pick up on that. And with that said, we'll have to end the timeline series. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you, Carl.